Let's go. All right, come on, Grandma.
Okay. My name is Dorthy Mae Gisch-Kingsmill. I was born on May 6, 1925. I was born in the 100 block of Prayer Street in New Orleans. That was South Prayer. And then when I was 9 months old, I understand I had pneumonia, which I was very, very ill. But then we moved to 2643 Cleveland Avenue, and I know we were there when I was 3 years old because I had pictures of my 3rd birthday with jillions of cousins all around me. We were sitting on the steps, and I was there with a great big bow in my hair. And from there, I must have been younger than 3 because one day my mother and I were in the backyard, and somebody was coming down the alleyway, and Mother says, "Who's that?" I said, "Man come, man come." It happened to be my dad who was coming back off of the ship, but I didn't recognize him. And then after that, my Aunt Margaret, my grandmother, my mother, my dad, and I all lived together. However, my dad was at sea most of the time. And then I went to Howard School, and that was about 6 blocks from where I lived, and all the children walked together. And when I was in kindergarten in Ms. Walsh's class, she was asking the children, what did they want to be when they grew up? You heard the thing, a fireman, a nurse, and when it came to be my turn, I said, I want to get up and dress and go downtown just like my mother does. However, my mother got ribbed about that because the teacher told her, and they said, they all know what you do, Miss Gish. You go downtown all the time. And then another time when I was in Howard School, I guess it must have been 2nd grade or so, I was going, and there was a grocery store on the way, and the grocer was out there sweeping the front sidewalk, and they had some kittens out there, and I stooped and petted it. And he said, would you like one? I said, oh, I'd love one. So I picked it up, and I proceeded to take it to school. Well, the next thing I know, I'm in the principal's office, Miss Thomas, and she's calling my mother and says, Miss Gish, you can't let your daughter bring a cat to school. Mother says, a cat? She doesn't have a cat. She says, well, she does now, and you'll have to come get it. So that was one of the things that happened to me at Howard School. And then from there, when I must have been in the 2nd grade or so, too, I was always having colds and bronchial conditions, and the doctor told my mother to take me out of school for a half year, because we had half years. They were divided into terms. So if you flunked a half year, you didn't have to pass the whole year over again. So they took me out of school for a half year, and I spent some of the time in Bay St. Louis because my grandmother had a house on Hancock Street. And that's where they took me and let me play in the sunshine and rest. So that's what I got to do 1/2 year of my schooling. And then after that, we moved from there to Murat Street when I was 10 years old. That was 316 South Murat. And then went to P.T. Beauregard, which is now no longer called that. They've changed the name. But that was only 3 blocks from my house. And there was a teacher there by Miss Beauregard. And you had better know your English, because if not, you stayed after school until 5 o'clock. That was the latest they could keep you. But she had standing room only in her classroom, because as soon as she called on you, if you couldn't conjugate a verb, sit down, come back after school. And then also, if you weren't finished by 5 o'clock, you came a half hour earlier in the morning and went back to her room. But that's how come we learned English so well. But also we had sewing and cooking classes in school. I remember in the first sewing class we embroidered dish towels, and then we made a dress in the 2nd year of our sewing classes. And we then had to wear the dresses we made on stage. In the morning, we always had assembly. So then they had all the girls walk across the stage in the dresses that they made. But also, I was also involved with Trinity Evangelical Reformed Church. I made my confirmation there when I was 12, but I went to Sunday school there all the time. And my two cousins, Margie and Elva, they were like sisters because I didn't have any. But their mother and father would bring them either on a Friday night or a Saturday. And they spent the weekend with us, and they went to Sunday school with us, and on Sundays, we always had dinner together. My grandmother, my mother, my aunt, my uncle, and my cousins. And the dinner was always the same. Stewed chicken with rice and gravy and a salad and peas. And my mother would always forget the bread because my Uncle George would say, "Sweetie, you forgot it again." But anyway, we were tied up with the church. I was in the choir, which later, when I was a little older than 12. But I can't sing a note. But if I stayed next to Marilyn or Manuel, it helped guide me through the songs that way. But also, we had May festivals from the church. And this one year in the lot, there was a big vacant lot next to the Brown's house, and they had a stage. And Marilyn and Velma and two other girls and myself, we did the hula. Miss Nuss was a dancing school teacher and taught us. We had the gray skirts, and we danced to a little gray shack in Hawaii. And then another time for church, we had, did this fall? Another time we went ahead and had a play. I was supposed to be a maid that spoke with an Irish brogue. However, I could play the maid, but I never could get the Irish brogue. That never did work. So we were, as I say, I was involved with that. And then we had the Junior League, which was a club, and we went on hay rides. And then the minister always went too, Reverend Scherer. He was fabulous. And I was, before I went out to California, I had become a Sunday school teacher, but I was only there for about 3 or 4 months as a Sunday school teacher because I went to California. But before that, I went to McMain High School, and McMain was an all-girls school. The grammar schools were both boys and girls, but the high schools were separated. And I enjoyed McMain, but one day the boys from Forte High went on strike, and they came down the street, and the girls were in the room, and they kept yelling and screaming for the girls to come out from McMain to join them. And Miss Leckett, the principal, got on the line. "Young girls, you remember your ladies and stay away from the windows." And you had better stay away from the windows. But my years at McMain were very nice, but we also had sororities in high school. We had Hell Week even, and Pledge Week, which is something most high schools, I guess, nowadays would frown upon. But we had a good time, and I had some great friends in high school. One day, a few of us decided we had never been in an airplane. So we all went down to Shushan Airport, which is now, it was out on the lakefront. It was the only airport in New Orleans at the time. We got on the plane and went to Baton Rouge just so we could fly. And then we went to the Capitol and had pictures taken on the Capitol steps. And then how we got back home, I have no idea. But we did lots of things that way. And when I was little, as going to Hancock House in Bay St. Louis, we would take the trains. My grandmother would take my two cousins and myself, and we'd go ahead and ride the train and then walk with our suitcases, I guess about 5 blocks or so from the train station. And this lady, even though At the time, I wasn't very fond of her because she was a disciplinarian in the house, but she was, now I realized this woman would take 2 children off and washed their clothes and fed them and did all this for them, and then, but now I realized how much she did mean to all of us. And we had, a mailman was always drawn with a horse cart for the mail, and my Aunt Margaret would send over little pieces of material so that we could use it to make doll clothes out of. That would be there. And I did have, and then some people, the 2 houses away, were the Heismans, and I would call them Grandma and Grandpa Heis. And he was a carpenter and always had little pieces of wood around. And we didn't have all these fangled beds and toys that the children do now. So we would make the blocks of wood would be a bed, or another block of wood we'd draw and it would be a chest of drawers, or little pine cones would become a lamp. But we did all of this kind of stuff. As I got older there, we would go out to swim out at St. Stanislaus, because there was a little beach there, and we would walk there. My grandmother would let us go. But when the train would come by at 5 o'clock, we could see it. You had better get out the water, and she knew how long it took to walk from the St. Stanislaus back to our house. And you'd better get there, or else somehow or other you would be punished. I was never spanked, but I can tell you I've been punished. I've missed. You couldn't go to the show on a Friday night for the cereal, so you missed that. Or you did something else, you couldn't go outside and play. And then I went on out to from high school. I went to Peters, S.J. Peters. That was because I had more than enough credits to finish 4 years of high school. However, I needed a half a year of history, because you needed 3 histories, and I only had 2.5 histories. So I decided to go to summer school, and I took 3 courses there. But summer school was a blast, because down in the basement of summer school, they had a jukebox. So afterwards, we could, the boys and the girls would get there, and we'd go dancing and everything. And then after that, they had voted on who would be the best dressed. My girlfriend, Georgiana, was best dressed, and a Chinese boy was most intelligent for the boys, and I was voted most intelligent in the girls at the time. How they came up with that, I'm not so sure. But anyway, then from there, went on to Maben, which was a secretarial type school. It was a public one that lots of children went to after they finished their high school, because we only had 7 years of grammar school and 4 years of high school. So I went in and took secretarial classes. Fortunately, I was very close to the teacher who taught the stenographic things, because I hated shorthand. And so she knew I did it, and I certainly wasn't going to be doing well in it. So she let me go over to the room where they had the mimeograph machines and the other machines, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So it was nice to know personally a teacher who let me do that. But I really liked to have the bookkeeping, and most important, they would come by, the different companies would come by and say they needed an employee for this, or they needed someone for that. So they needed somebody in the bookkeeping department one day. And I said, oh, I'll go. And I was interviewed and accepted. But the main thing about that, it was at MPA, Motion Picture Advertising. And my boyfriend worked there too. So that was very important, because I had met him. His name was Melvin Wright. I had met him when my cousin Margie had made her communion and had gone over to visit her great aunts or something on her mother's side of the family. They weren't related to me. And when I was there, I can remember I had a big navy blue hat and navy blue and white pumps, and a navy blue and white dress. I mean, it was a little suit, the top and the skirts, and the white gloves and the navy blue and white purse. And next thing you know, here comes this nice-looking boy over the house. And it was introduced, he was Melvin. But he was working as a soda jerk across the street at the corner of Canal and Dershenwall. But then later, after we met that way, his mother and them called my parents and wanted to know if it would be all right if he would take me out. So they said, all right. It's probably at about 15. And naturally, we didn't have cars or something, so we'd ride the streetcar and go to the shows downtown. And so I dated Melvin. But in the meantime, I was also in grammar school, a Girl Scout, and then I was in high school. I belonged to TAC, the sorority, and then I went from that. The Demolays had dances, and I was also a Rainbow Girl, and we had dances. And the Rainbow Girls got an invitation for them and their date, and 2 extra ones for boys, so that all our dances, we had 3 extra men there who would cut in on us, and we got to meet new people, and we really had a great time. We had the sorority dances too, but we didn't have the proms like now. We had just the senior prom, but that was all. They didn't have the junior proms and things, but we had lots of people to dance, and we would have our dances a lot of times at the Jung Hotel, is where most of them on the roof or at the ballroom of the Jung Hotel. And let's see what else I can say. Melvin and I went ahead and we dated, but in the meantime I dated Jack Becker from church, and although it wasn't an exclusive situation, but I had a lot of young men I went out with at the time. And earlier, we had king cake parties when I was a little younger, and I had Lee Mao. I had gotten the bean, and I needed a king, so I asked Lee Mao. He had gone to church too with me. But after that, had been working at the MPA, and my mother and dad were then out in California, and they wanted me to come, so I did. But again, I digressed. I forgot to tell you about my trip to New York. My dad was at the time in New York, and we lived at 11A South Oxford Street because my dad was going for gyro lessons in New York. And we lived in, as I say, in Brooklyn, and not far from Flatbush. So we got to go to see the Rockettes and to the Statue of Liberty. And it happened to be the same year, either 1939 and 1940, because it was the years they had the World's Fair there. So we went to the World's Fair. And then also we went up to upstate New York because some friends from Bay St. Louis had been living in New Jersey, right across from Brooklyn there, and they had a cabin up in the mountains just shy of the Canadian border. So we went up there, and I was going to be very brave because I said I wanted to go swimming in the lake. They said, no, you don't, honey, because it's going to be cold. I said, oh, no, I can do that. Well, I put the bathing suit on, and I went to the lake, and I guess I got as high as my knees in water and flew out because that was much too cold to go in swimming. But that was part of my trip over into, see, the longest time I was actually just with my mother and dad and myself was those 3 summer months in New York, and then the 3 years I was out in California. So get back to California. I went, because Daddy happened to be stationed there. He had been on the Sangay first before he went out there, which was a minesweeper. And then after that, they took him off because they were getting ready to commission the Hershey, the General Hershey. and I knew all the people there from friends of my mother and dad. As I said, I was with adults most of my life, and we lived on Jones Street in San Francisco in the 900 block, and it was a hilly street, and they had a cable car that came right down in front of us, and right a block or so away was the Mark Hopkins Hotel in Nob Hill. So I was there, and after I got there, the first night they had taken me to a play at one of the theaters there, and then the following night, my dad had gotten a Jeep with a little sailor to drive us, and we went out to Stuckey's or Sucrose, I'm not sure exactly the name of it. And it was an ice skating ring, and they had all indoor swimming pools. It was right there on the Pacific Ocean. So we went, and I wanted to go ice skating. Well, when I had the ice skates on and was starting to skate, I yelled out, "Bubby!" Here was Bubby Larson, who lived a block away from me when we lived on Murat Street. And we all played together, and we went to the skating rings together and all. But he was there, and it was like our old home week because he had another friend from New Orleans there. Okay, as I say, I was at the skating ring, and that was in 1943. I was 18 years old at the time. And I lived in San Francisco for 3 years during the war years. But I had worked at a plumbing company, Brody's, for a short while. And it was with plugging in and unplugging the switchboard operation. And then it came Christmas time, and Mr. Brody didn't go, but the elderly gentleman who did all the books, and then one other lady and one or two other men, all went to this older gentleman's apartment for a Christmas drink, and I was invited to go. Well, I proceeded to go and enjoy their company. Then they came back and brought out a drink. It was scotch. It was the first time I ever had scotch. And it tasted like soap, and I thought I was foaming from the mouth. However, that wasn't the case, but I excused myself, went to the bathroom, and down the drain went the rest of the scotch. When I came back out, "Oh, I see your glass is empty. How about filling?" "Oh, no, thank you. I really just came to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, too, but I do have to leave. I have a date later tonight. I wanted out of there as fast as I could go. I wanted no more soap in my mouth." So then that Christmas, I wanted a Christmas tree. So I carried a Christmas tree all the way from Market Street up these 9 blocks of hills. And naturally, we didn't have ornaments, so Mother and I strung popcorn, and we cut out paper doilies and stuff. So I had a Christmas tree at any rate. And my girlfriend after that, Georgiana, because we were always together from high school, we came out and stayed with me for over maybe 2 months or so, because before that I had left the plumbing company, and it wasn't the type of work I really wanted to do, even though the people were lovely. Oh, and during that time while I was working there, my boyfriend Melvin came out too, and they knew he was coming, and they kept saying, "When he comes, what are you going to do? Are you going to run? You got to run to him and give him a kiss." I said, "No, I'll see him." And they were egging me on, these older gentlemen. But anyway, he came, and we got to see each other. And at the time, Catherine and her sister Helen had an apartment next block from where we lived. These were friends also from Chicago, who were friends of the people who were in the Navy that lived below us. And anyway, we went over to their place and all, and he must have stayed around 3 or 4 days in San Francisco area, and then he left. And then after that, as I say, Georgiana had come over, but however, we decided to go look for jobs together, and we did wind up at the Caldwell Banking Real Estate Company, and we got in the bookkeeping department there. So I worked there, and Jimmy was the gentleman who was more or less over us, but we worked there, and then one Easter we went to the Giardelli Park area, and then after that there was a temple, because this was on a Good Friday, and there was a temple, a Buddhist temple, and so we decided to go into the Buddhist temple, and we lit those sticks of incense that way. But after that, Georgiana's parents decided she was an only child too, and they were missing her, so they moved out to California. And my uncle and aunt, George, and their 2 daughters moved out to California too. So I was again with my cousins, who, as I say, were like sisters. And we went on ski trips when I was out in California too. As I say, it was over the Washington and President's Day holiday. We went to Strawberry Lodge. Oh, you've got pictures. In fact, I brought some for the kids. And they showed me with skis and stuff. However, we never went on a ski lift. We never went in and ski, except at Strawberry Lodge, Georgiana and I did put skis on and tried to go up the mountain, and try to walk this way on skis was a chore, but that didn't work out. But we did have a great time, and it was a lovely lodge. And then they were playing Rum and Coca-Cola was one of the tunes at the time. And then, as I say, I was always involved with the YWCA over there. Georgiana wasn't so much, because when her parents came, so they moved over to Alameda. But at the Y, we always had dances on Fridays and Saturdays and things. And Eric would be one of the boys from New Orleans I met, and he was always there. And Ernie Dews was, not Ernie Dews, this was Ernie Westby Gibson. His sister ran the Y, so he was there. So I was always dancing with them and other ones, and met lots of other young people. Actually, when I left San Francisco, they all got a charm bracelet for me, and all had their names on it. Unfortunately, I lost it in the hurricane. And one of the things we did with one of those boys, we went out to go fishing along the rocks, and I caught this most ugly fish. I have no idea what kind it was, but it was ugly, ugly, ugly fish. So, and then that night we went out to the beach there, and they had the Ferris wheel. So we got on the Ferris wheel. We got to the top, and I'm screaming, "Get me off this thing! Get me off this thing!" So when they got to the bottom, they let me and this boy off. I have no idea of his name, but he was one of the boys that I went out with. And I guess I was not a very nice person, but I tried to be, because Ernie had asked me out for a certain dance, and I told him, well, if Eric is in town, I'll go with Eric, but if not, I'll go with you. But I was trying to be honest, but he accepted that as an okay deal. And when Bubby Larson would be in town, we'd go out with him, and Margie got a date, a friend of Bubby's, and went too. And we, when the, Ernie, I regress again, Ernie Dews was brother of the Davises, who were Navy people, and he would come on up there, but he was from the Army in Fort Ord, and he would come, and we'd go out all the time together. But he wound up marrying somebody, and his sister came back and thought, oh, did you tell her? To my mother, she said, tell her what? That Ernie got married. I said, that's all right by me. Evidently, they thought I was in love with him and wanted to marry him, because he sort of hinted that he wanted to marry me, but I wasn't about to get married at that time. I was having too much fun. So anyway, after that, Ernie wound up getting married, and he wound up getting a divorce as soon as the war was over. But in the meantime, again, out in San Francisco, and then the following year, Margie and I went to another ski lodge and all. And when Georgetta and I went, we weren't that far from Reno, so we took a bus and went over to Reno there. And when the war ended, Margie, no, it was Elva and I, we went down to go to Market Street, and it was bedlam with all of everything going on down there. And somebody threw an egg, and it landed in Elva's hair. So she wound up getting an egg shampoo out of it. But I wasn't in San Francisco a lot longer than that, because the war ended and my mother and Daddy went back to New Orleans, because my dad then got to go back with Lykes Brothers Steamship Company. Again, I digress. When I was in San Francisco and Captain Smith was there when they were commissioning the ship, the General Hershey, along with my dad there. And then this one evening, they wanted us to go to the Mark Hopkins Hotel for dinner with them. As I say, I was included as an adult again, with adults all the time. And we had a lovely dinner, and afterwards, everybody's sitting around in the lodge, in the loge area, and they come by with asking, what did you want to drink? And they all ordered B&B. And I said, I'll have the same. Well, once more, instead of sipping it, I gulped it. I had a burning throat, but I didn't dare say anything because I didn't want to embarrass myself. But again, that's what happens when you drink things you don't know you're doing. And again, one more time, when I was in San Francisco, there was a young boy who invited me to go to his family for dinner. And that was fine. It was down in Redwood City. They were very gracious, but they had a large pitcher of white milk at the table. They poured me a glass of white milk. Well, trying to be polite, I sat there and sipped it and would eat and sat there, because I hated white milk. But trying to be polite, I did get about 3/4 of the glass down. When the gentleman, the boy's father says, oh, I see your glass is getting empty. I said, oh, I've had plenty, thank you. He refills the glass. But that was when I stopped being polite. I never drank another sip of it. And I don't believe that you should drink or eat anything you don't like, because that happened to me again. But this time I was engaged and back to New Orleans. There was my mother-in-law invited me over to dinner to meet a friend of my husband's who had been on the ship with him. And my mother-in-law, to-be, served Brussels sprouts. I don't eat Brussels sprouts. So here comes the plate passing by me. To be polite again, I took 2 Brussels sprouts and put them on my plate. And it passed it. This gentleman that's sitting next to me says, only 2? Let me get you more. Oh, thank you very much, but I have 2. Oh, 2's not enough. And he went on and on the time. I was ready to get up there and throw the whole bowl of Brussels sprouts on his head. But I was a lady and I didn't. So I cut the Brussels sprouts and downed a half of one with a glass of water behind it and ate something else. I managed to eat 2 Brussels sprouts, but I'll never forgive that man for what he did to me. And that is my experience as far as eating things and being polite. So now I ask anybody if around me, don't eat what you don't like if I serve it to you. Then when I came back from California, my friend Georgiana had been going out with this crowd of Bill Kingsmill, and Melvin was a friend of theirs too, and all. So she had been going out with him, And they wrote back and forth, and he started to write to me too. So I did answer these letters, because I wrote to a lot of people, such as Jack Becker, who was a friend of mine from Trinity Church, who went to West Point. In fact, I had an invitation to go to his graduation, but I was in San Francisco at the time and wasn't able to go. But anyway, we were back to my, Bill writing me letters, so that when I came back, he came over to the house. And why he came over to the house was because my grandmother had, for some reason or other, gotten in her head that I shouldn't date Melvin. And that had been before I went to California. But that was all right, because my Aunt Margaret was my confidant. So I had told her that I'll be going out with him, but Pat is going to come to the door and pick me up. That was Georgiana's date. So Pat would come pick me up, and Melvin was in the car, and we'd go off on our way to the shows and things. And then we came back. But when I was back in New Orleans, naturally I didn't want again upset my grandmother. So Bill came over with the idea of picking me up and taking me off to go meet Melvin, to go out with him again. But now, just made 20, not quite 21, I don't think, I was maybe a week or so before my 21st birthday. But anyway, that didn't last as far as my going out with Melvin, because I found out that he was in the process of getting a divorce. He had gotten married, but had only been married for about 7 months or so when they decided they were getting a divorce. But I said, nope, I'm not getting involved with that. So that's when I started dating Bill. He decided to date with me. And speaking of that, we were married, well over a year and a half, when he decided to tell me that he knew me from the skating ring. He actually described what I wore at the skating ring, and remembered to tell me I always used a handkerchief in my hand when we skated, because how that came about at the skating ring, they would have regular skating, and then they'd stop and say couples only, so some boy would come by and get a girl to dance or skate with them. But I never remembered Bill from that time at all, because I was always with the boys that I knew, like Lee and Bubby and JT and the rest of them. But anyway, so finally Bill and I dated, and then he asked me to get married, and we were married in 1948 on May 2nd, a few days before my 23rd birthday. And we were married at Trinity Evangelical Church, and I had 4 bridesmaids, 2 cousins, and 2 friends. In fact, the friend Francis married Jay Frasiano, and Selden was the groomsman of my husband's, and Sally had worked with me when I was back in New Orleans. I had gone to work for an insurance company, and she worked with me, and we became friends, so she was a bridesmaid too. And when we went for our honeymoon to Chicago, that was another time. We friends of my husband's had managed to set up and meet us at the train station, because we went on the train, and had us at the hotel there. But then there are other friends which he knew, they wanted us to go there and have lunch with them. That was fine with me. We went, and it was my birthday. So we went and had lunch. The lunch was fine. I had no problems with the food, but they wouldn't let us leave. They had us, and they said, oh no, you have to stay for supper. Here it is, our honeymoon, and we had reservations at a hotel downtown and for the show and everything, but we missed that because they wouldn't let us leave. The girl was was a little older than Bill and stuff, but she was sort of crippled, and she just wanted us to stay. Why they kept me, I don't know, but we did. And then one of our days in Chicago, we went to the Bittersweet restaurant. There, it was fine. It was a lovely little restaurant, and they gave us the menu, and we ordered duck. Bill ordered duck, and I ordered duck. And after we had our orders, the lady says, now, oh, the smorgasbord is over there. Go help yourself. Well, that was great. We both got up, got a plate, and tasted this and tasted that, and got this and got the other. And it was all delicious. But by this time, I'm getting pretty full, and here comes our dinner. It wasn't just slices of duck, which we thought. They had a whole duck for us, along with the rest of the vegetables and everything else. And when we got through eating, my husband said, I looked like I was 10 months pregnant and ready to roll down the streets that way. But anyway, Chicago and our honeymoon was great. And we came back, we went back to Pichilou Place to live. And I don't know, nobody decided where we were going to live or anything else. It just happened, I guess. Things just happen in my life. I don't know how come they do, but they just do. And then I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of things to tell you. Maybe you'll remember to ask me something. But after we were married, the house was on 940 Pichilou Place, and there was a basement downstairs. So Mother decided, well, she would go ahead and pay for all the supplies, and Maura said, yeah, because it was her home. Go ahead and fix it. So we built an apartment down there, and Georgiana, as I said, had been an only child, and they had built an apartment above the garage of her parents' home. But we did all the work down at Pichilou. Bill would come by and said, how high do you want this? Where do you want this? And it was all built the way I wanted it done, which is now being taken over by my son Harold and is redoing the whole place. But then while I was pregnant, we hadn't built the apartment yet. It wasn't complete or anything. While I was pregnant with Cindy at the time, Bill was working with the railroad on the riverfront. And every night, because he had this, well, anyway, he got off at 11 o'clock at night. 3 to 11, I think, was his shift. And he would stop at the donut shop there and bring me donuts. So here it is, 12 o'clock at night, I'm sitting there eating beignets. But that was almost every night. But I only wound up gaining 5 pounds because I was only 98 pounds when I got married. And I only had 5 pounds added to me after she was born. But I exploded after Harold came along because he went to nursery school, and when he would come home, I'd want to talk to him and find out what went on in nursery school. And we'd sit there with peanut butter on top of vanilla wafers and eating them. I just didn't feed him to him, I fed him to myself, which was the wrong thing to do if you don't want to gain weight. And during the years, I wound up having 5 children. And again, they came along, the years went by, and there are things I remember about them, but there was a lot of blur. We had moved out to 8840 Westgate Street when Harold was about a year old. We had bought the house before that, but it didn't hustle out there until it was time to get the children settled in school in the beginning of September, because schools didn't start then until after Labor Day. And from there on, lots of things just happened, because by that time I had the 5 children, but I was always fortunate because I had a lot of help. Like when Cindy was going to dancing school, I didn't have to worry about Randy and them being taken care of. I just went on to dancing school, and my mother and them took care of the kids, or my mother-in-law would. When it was time to go to shopping for community bargain days, my mother-in-law would say, here, take some money and go get some, because my mother went on shopping days too, and I did. So I always had lots of help. Even though I had 5 kids, I was very fortunate. In fact, I thank the Lord for the family they gave me before and what I have now, because it has been a joy to be in them. Granted, as a child, I wasn't always sure it was a joy, but it was. And as I say, I had another grandmother, which was my daddy's mother, when I was younger too. This was one time I spent the night at her house. Now, I guess at that time I must have been about 10 or 11 years old. I didn't spend the night there very often. However, it was winter time, and she got in my pajamas and began to get in bed, and I let out a scream, and she came running. I said, something in the bed, there's something in the bed. She had been so nice to heat the bed up with a hot water bottle, and when my feet touched it, it wiggled, and I was afraid there was some animal or something in that bed. But she was so different in personality than the lady I call Mama, which was my grandmother's mother. And because when I would go to visit her as a child, I would be able to get into this big trunk which held all kinds of dancing costumes and things, because my Aunt Olga was a dancer. She had danced on the stage on the Sanger Theater and a lot of other places, the nightclubs and things. But I could go ahead with this grandmother. I could put makeup on her, and I could dress her up in the costumes, and I could get in the costumes, and they had toe shoes, and I'd get up on my toes and dance all around the place. And she was a fun grandmother, but she wasn't the disciplinarian that my other one was. And as I say, the other grandmother would take me off to aunts' houses, this one, and the aunt house there, and different ones. So I always was the one to meet all the people. And my cousin Elva, if we went to a wedding or a funeral later in life, would say, Dot, am I supposed to know that person? Well, who's that? Oh, that's Cousin Lizzie. Oh, and well, who's that? Oh, that's Aunt Maggie. Because she didn't know all these people, because she didn't get drug all around like I did. Because she'd go out with the hats on and the gloves on and stuff. And my grandmother belonged to the Spanish-American War Veterans Auxiliary, which was called the Lizards. And again, I was taken with her when they would have these dances and things. Again, I'm just, probably 12 years old, 13 years old, something like that. And some of these other people would bring their grandchildren, and we would get to know one another. And then one time they had a record player downstairs, so we all got down there and were doing that and dancing all around by ourselves, away from the adults. But another time with the Spanish-American War veterans, they sold poppies to raise money at the time for the veterans, and I was out there on Canal Street selling poppies. And also during the war years, in the movie theaters, they would come around and sell bonds, war bonds, and to people, and they'd take up collections of money for the USOs and things. And let's go back further than this. During the Depression era, they went to the movies, and they would get people to go to the movies. They would give glasses away or something. I still have some of the glasses that were given to my mother and them when we went to the Escorial movie on Bank Street. But during the Depression years, my dad didn't have a job, but we didn't feel it too much, I guess, because my Aunt Margaret still had her job at the Wildlife and Fisheries Commission. And I guess I didn't realize it, because at the time we were probably affected, because I remember mostly we always had plenty to eat, but it was like a one-pot thing. Like you'd have red beans and rice, or you would have split pea soup, or something else, but there was never a lot of meat in it. It was just for flavoring. So I guess that's how they stretched the money at the time. But as a child, you didn't realize that. But there would be men that would come to the door all the time asking for something to eat or something. And my grandmother would always give them a little dish of whatever we had and a slice of bread. They would always stay on the porch and eat it. And they were quite thankful. But again, there's another thing. When we would come home from school, we would change our clothes. I guess that was to keep from having to wash them so much. That saved on water and soap and things. So we would put on old clothes when we would go out and play hopscotch and jump rope and dodge the ball and things of that sort. And because my next door neighbor, when I first moved to Murat Street, as I said, I was 10 years old at the time. Catherine Gonzi and Rosemary Gonzi, they were there. We used to play dolls all the time. And they sat on their side steps and I was on my side steps with a wire fence between us. And so we communicated with our dolls, would pretend they were visiting them and back and forth. But that is pretty much what went on as a child and things. And as I say, Bill was a great husband because he got off the train and when he was on a siding, and there was this batch of irises. Irises were my favorite flower. He got off the train while it was stopped and walked through mush and all to pick me irises. Now that meant more to me than a man that would go to a flower shop and buy 2 dozen of red roses, because he actually did that and not say, here's some money, give me some roses. And we wound up building, after we were married, I didn't want to travel with a lot of children, even with one of them, because you didn't have throwaway diapers, you didn't have the formulas thing, because you had to sit here with the formula and mix it with powdered and water and stuff, and sterilize bottles and all this. So we, with the help of my mother and everybody in the family, my Aunt Margaret bought the lot for us, and my mother chipped in with all of the supplies. As I say, I was a very fortunate child. And we had Roger Heisman built the frame of the house for us. He was a friend of ours from Bay St. Louis, and he was a contractor, but he built the frame of the house, and we went ahead and did all the rest with the help of my in-laws. I can see my mother-in-law there too, putting up the tape on the sheetrock overhead and holding up sheetrock. And when we did sheetrock then, and it wasn't smooth tape, you put this big heavy coat of stuff and then you roll it. The house on Felicity Street, which went with the hurricane, all had that heavy walls, and they were nubby. If you'd feel it, you could run your hand across it. But so we did that, and I'm sure Randy and Kevin would remember when they were mixing concrete. My husband had the concrete mixer there, and they would fill the buckets up with sand, and they would do that. But they were just little boys at the time. And Cindy, one time, had the next door neighbor come over, and she was, this was a boyfriend at the time. And unfortunately, we were out at the beach, and here comes Margaret, who was about 3 years old at the time, and was running down the beach, and I told Cindy, get her. So Cindy runs to get her, and scratches her toe on an oyster shell or something, I don't know, and it's bleeding all over the place. And this other boy is there, and she is embarrassed to no end because she's got a toe all cut up, and we have to go over to get it stitched up.
So you were building the house in Mississippi?
Yes, it was the house in Mississippi.
So from Pishaloot
What was that? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, where was it before you guys were building in Mississippi? Where were y'all moving
It
from?
was a summer home.
Okay.
It was just a vacation home.
Yeah, this was a vacation house. We didn't live there. It was, I'd pack up the children as soon as school ended, and we'd stay there all summer until Labor Day, and then we'd come back in town on Labor Day. But, because as I say, we didn't want to do that. Now, there was a period, in that period of time, they went to Dealman Center, because Cindy and Randy, it was a church camp, and they would go off for a week or so at a time. So when Cindy went, Mickey went, which was my cousin Margie's daughter. And then, then when Randy went, Joey went, which was Margie's son. As I say, we were constantly together, because when we moved to Westgate, Elva lived a block or two away from us, and Margie lived a block or two away in the opposite direction. It seemed like, even when I was a child, everybody lived within the same area. And now this is something that I still to this day say, I don't know how it happened, but by Aunt Elva and my mother and I was very little at the time, maybe 3 years old. I think there's about 3 years difference between Margie and I. We were in the backyard, and they were getting newspapers out of the shed. Well, with the shed and my aunt there, and the next thing we knew is we hear a baby cry, and somebody from inside says, "Oh, it's a girl." And to this day, my aunt was next to me, so I have no idea how Margie was born. Even though I know how children are born, there is something wrong. My aunt was with me, and Margie was born in that house. Don't understand it, but that's how it stays in my mind until this day. And I can't think of anything much right now. If anybody wants to bring me further up to date on anything.
All right. What's the biggest difference from when you were a little girl until now in society?
What's the difference? Oh, well, a lot of difference. The children were more polite most of the times than some of the ones I see out there. There's a difference between the way women are treated in the workplace, apparently, and because they're out working. When I first grew up, the women didn't work, but the Second World War brought them all out, like Rosie the Riveter and stuff. But
okay, and what were the expectations that your parents had for you when you were younger? Like what roles?
oh, I don't know that they had any real expectations except for me to be a lady. That was all I know. Okay.
Where was your first job, Grandma?
My first job was with MPA, Motion Picture Advertising Company, and my salary for the month was $17. And my aunt thought, oh, what a wonderful thing, because when she started off, it was more like $8 for the whole month. And this was a month's salary, not an hourly salary.
For 40 hours?
For a whole week, Monday through Friday.
Wow.
And that was it, $17 for the month. Okay. No, your question.
This is a joint question.
Okay.
Oh, we are doing this. She wanted to know what kind of parties, any extracurricular activities that you were doing with the parties.
Oh, well, as I say, we had sorority dances, demolay dances, and all the things I've already mentioned in the video.
Okay. How old were you at your first job when you
And
started?
my first job, I was not quite 18. I was 17 because I had to get a permit to work.
A real question. What was your favorite part about becoming a mom?
Becoming a mom,
mother?
a mother. That I had a little girl, because I really wanted twins when Cindy was born, but I wound up with only one. So,
I think it worked out because you would have had 6.
no, well, yeah, by that time it would have been too many. But as I say, my great-grandmother had 8. One of my aunts had 8. One of my other aunts had 9. So that's the Coogan clan.
I'm really happy with 3. I'm really good with 3. I'm not going to try to match you.
Okay.
I'm good with my dog.
Okay. You're good with your dog, huh? Okay. Any more questions?
Hello.
Hi, Kira.
Hi. What was your most favorite job that you had?
My most favorite job? MPA, I guess, because my boyfriend was there. It was my first job. So that was it, because when they were making movies in the back, I used to go back there, and Mr. Ward, who was a friend of us, and his son had gone to grammar school with me. They just lived a block away. He worked there, so he allowed me to come in there too. And then the cameraman was a nice guy too. So well, every time I got a chance to leave my desk, into the other area I went. So
Yes, ma'am.
that was it.
All right.
My least favorite job, however, was I had worked for just a month or 2, and that was with the Silvermans. They had decided they needed somebody to work during the tax collection season. Apparently, they didn't tell me it was going to be a temporary job, so I only worked there a short while, and that was it. That was the worst job. Who else is coming?
Your favorite.
Oh, I don't say that. That's not fair. I don't have favorites. I don't have favorites. Hello. How you doing? All right. What's your question, Twinkles? Twinkle.
Okay. My question is, what was it like growing up during the Great Depression? I heard you answer some of it
Yes.
when you were
Well,
talking.
that was just what I answered in there was just about the same. As I say, I personally didn't feel like I was deprived or anything. And again, it is just with the gentleman walking up to the house wanting something to eat. And then, oh yes, I don't know that I mentioned that my dad was with the CCC. I don't know if I mentioned that on there, because the shipping wasn't doing well at all, so naturally he didn't have a job. But we went and spent a week with my aunt in Slidell during the Depression years. Well, what he did, I don't know, but the CCE people took care of the forest, and if you even go now to a lot of the state parks, you'll see monuments, things that were built by the CC people.
What is that CCC stand for?
Was the Civil Corps. Now, what the other C was, I don't know. Civilian Civil Corps.
Or something like that.
Something like that.
Okay.
The CC.
And then the World War II.
What was
it like to grow up during World War II? I don't know. Was that something that you experienced and were affected by on a daily basis?
Well, it's a shame to say this, because there were so many people that were hurt and killed and maimed, and things that were going on all over the world. But I had a blast during the Second World War. And as I say, I'm ashamed to say it, but I did have, there was those years in San Francisco.
Okay.
And but
Because that's where your dad was.
well, my dad was stationed out there,
Okay.
and that was the most time I ever spent with just my dad and my mother and myself.
Okay.
Those 3 years.
So you were raised by your
My
grandparents.
mother, my grandmother, and my aunt. I had 3 women that were there. My aunt was my confidant and was always there for me, like there.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was there, but when the ship would come in port, the Miss Tony Esposito and Audie and another lady and my mother, they'd all drive like to Mobile if the ship came in, and they'd go there and get a hotel and stay there for the night or so, and the ship would move over to Biloxi, they'd follow it. So they followed the ship when it was in these ports. So Mother would be gone during that time. And then there was a period of time before they went to San Francisco, Daddy and them were stationed out of Norfolk, Virginia. So she went up to Norfolk, Virginia, and she was up there. They were up there when it was time for me to graduate from high school. I did not want to get up on that stage. I had already left McMain and I was already off at Mabin and getting ready to go off to work probably. But then they came back and they insisted I get all dressed up in a white evening gown and march up on the stage. But I didn't attend any of the luncheons or anything because I was well out of the high school setting.
I see. Interesting. So your mom's mom was who raised you?
My grandmother, the one we call Mama. I have confused some of my children, such as Harold. When I say Mama, he's probably thinking I'm talking about my mother, but I'm really talking about my grandmother because we all called her Mama.
There you go. And so your disciplinarian grandma was Papa Bill's mom.
That was Mama Bill's mother was just Pearl.
Was your dad's mom? I'm getting it all mixed up.
No, my dad's mom was Louisa Pank Gisch.
And she was the one who
was funny.
drug you all over town?
No.
No?
She was my dad's mother was the one who let me put makeup on her and danced all around. My mother's mother, the one I lived with that I call Mama, she's the one that took me to all the relations and took me to Bay St. Louis because I spent every summer over in Bay St. Louis. I understand they started taking me over when I was 9 months old.
Oh, wow. So you wanted to carry that tradition on with y'all's children, which is why you got the summer home.
Well, I was familiar with the Bay, and I went there, and we had friends that lived over there. And as I say, I wasn't about to travel with little kids. And so they would have more fun off in the Bay.
Yeah, great. I'll sit here and ask you questions all the Who's next?
Me and the boys. Come on. Come on, get it.
See, after we moved to Westgate Street, we didn't go to Bay St. Louis too much because we were able to join the Westgate Country Club, and they had the swimming pools and stuff there. And by that time, some of my older children, like Cindy and them, they wanted to go out on dates on the weekends, and their friends were here. So we stopped going to the Bay a lot after we moved out to Westgate because they went to the country club there.
All right, my question is, what is your favorite memory in life?
My favorite what?
Memory in life.
My favorite memory in life.
Being born.
Well, golly, that would be very difficult to say because I've got so many. No, I couldn't choose one.
What's your favorite memory in your earlier years as a little girl?
As a little girl, I guess when I had the measles, when my Aunt Margaret called and wanted to know did I wanted to bring me something, and I wanted a doll and a chest, and she brought me the little doll within the chest. So I guess that would be my favorite memory as a child that way.
That's awesome.
I have a question. How many boyfriends do you think you had?
How many boyfriends did I
You
have?
had a lot of boyfriends.
Oh, I had a lot of boyfriends. Don't ask me to name them all. I'd run out the list. It would be much too long. No, but there was only one, what I'd consider a true boyfriend was Melvin. And then, as I say, these other boys were fine. Even though Ernie Westby Gibson had come down and he wanted me to marry him. He came down after I was back in New Orleans and stayed at our house for almost a week. But as I say, I wasn't interested in getting married to him either. He was just a good friend. Date, yes, but that was it.
My question is, what was your favorite state in the United States that you've been to?
Well, the favorite state, California. I'd say San Francisco, but there were other parts of it too, like the mountains when I went up there with the snow and everything.
My question is why do you like sports so much for being an only child?
Oh, my dad was into sports, and I guess I wanted to be like my dad. We were in Bay St. Louis. He was over there. I don't know whether he was off from the ship for a little while or what, but they were having the big fights with, and it wasn't Joe Louis at the time. It was other ones. I can't think of their names right now, but Max Smelling was one of them. And I remember with the fights, and when we were in New York, as far as sports, there was a little restaurant, more of a bar, I'd say, and I would go with my dad, and they would have it on the radio, all of the fights going on at the time. But he liked sports, and I am a spectator sport person. Don't ask me to play anything, because I can't. And speaking of that, we'll go back to sports. In Bay St. Louis, there was a boy there who used to come over there. We would meet him at the swimming, and he would come over. And my Aunt Margaret had given me a tennis racket for my birthday. I guess it must have been 12th or 13th birthday, I'm not sure. It must have been 13th birthday. And he, Clyde Kerner was his name. And I had the tennis racket. I did not know how to play tennis, nor was I particularly interested in it. But he was a good tennis player and played for St. Stanislaus. He says, oh, come along, I'll teach you how to play. And along next to the courthouse there was a tennis court open for the public. So we went out there to go play tennis. Well, first of all, I'll hit the ball this way and hit the ball that way. So finally he says, we're playing tennis. You're not a ballet dancer. Well, up went my nose, and off I prodded right off the field, and that was the end of any tennis left, because I just scooted. That was not my thing. So, but I love football and all sports otherwise.
We know.
Yes, they know, because I used to have 2 televisions and a radio going on at the same time. Good, Katie. What's my girl want to know?
Where's the favorite place that you traveled out of the country?
Where's my favorite place out of the country? France.
France. What'd you do there?
Well, I went with 2 of the girls from ISIS, the officers, because I was in ISIS carnival organization, and her husband too, Armand, went with us on that trip. But we didn't have a tour. We went on our own, which was great. And we rented a car one time, and we drove all down France, different places, and along the trip, there was a big barrel, part of a barrel cover out on side of the building, and I said, oh, it's a winery, stop. So we stopped, and here are these French people, didn't speak any English, we didn't speak any French. I only knew one word, combien, which meant how much, and that was all. But we went, we knocked on the door, and they let us in, and we managed to communicate. They had their wines in this little shed area, and we tested them, and we could see vines growing up the side. They were so thrilled about us stopping there that they went and called their neighbors to come over to meet us. But that was one of the things on our trip there. But we went to Versailles, and I went to the Louvre, and I just enjoyed Paris. It was a wonderful city, and now there I wouldn't mind going back. I just wish I would have had more time to spend in the Louvre. Like, you sit in front of this picture of Mona Lisa. To me, it did absolutely nothing. But in the next room, they had some paintings that, to me, were far superior. They were paintings of horses, and you could, with men on their backs and all, but their eyes and their hoofs, and they were magnificent paintings. You can keep the Mona Lisa.
But you like the horses.
Yes.
How old were you when you went to France?
When I went to France, must have been 50s or 60s, it's more or less like in the 60s, I guess. Time has gone by, I don't know. No, I was well grown when we started making our trips with the people from ISIS. So.
And how did Papa Bill propose to you?
How did he propose to me? Actually, I don't know. I honestly don't know. All I know is that he must have, because we stopped at the drugstore and called home to see that if they were still up and stuff. And my Aunt Margaret answered the phone, and we told her we were coming over. And she went and told my mother, she says, they're coming. Now you make sure you don't interfere with what they want to say. But she didn't know, because I didn't tell her. I just told her we were coming over. But she must have had an inkling. But she wanted to make sure my mother wasn't going to squelch anything. Not that mother didn't like Bill or anything like that. But so we went, and then I didn't get the ring then. I think I got the ring about 2 days later. So.
Okay.
So he just couldn't wait.
No, I don't remember. But I know when we used to go out, we would go pick up, his grandfather would have to have a ride back from work. Evidently, he would take him to work. He worked on the railroad too, but not as an engineer. It was a yardsman or something. And we would always have to pick him up after he would get off from work. So I got to know Grampy, and he was a nice old gentleman. But lots of times when we dated, we would go, at that time, they had the outdoor theaters, and the one was on Veterans Highway, right near where David Drive is. And we would go there, we'd stop, and we'd get, from Manuel's, the hot tamales and bread, and we'd take that over there, and we'd eat hot tamales and the bread, and soft drinks we'd buy out at the show. But that's what we did some of the times, besides going downtown and things.
Isn't a question, but it's something I want you to tell to get on the video, because people won't expect this. Tell about your pet iguana.
Oh, when I was very little, my dad every now and then would bring something home. Well, this time he brought an iguana. Well, I used to take and walk around. I guess I was around 6 or so, maybe 7 or 5, I don't know, in those years. And I'd walk around with the iguana on my shoulders and stuff. Well, this one day, the house I lived on Cleveland, my grandmother owned it and had the lot next to it, which was a vacant lot, and then she had built a double house on it. Well, right next to our side, my Aunt May and her children lived, and next to him, I think it was a Walsh that lived there. Now, I'm not sure, but he called to my mother, "Oh, Sweetie," everybody called my mother Sweetie, that was her name. Nobody knew her by Doretta. But, so he called, "Sweetie, you gotta come see what I killed. This is the strangest old animal." My mother says, "Oh my gosh, you killed my daughter's pet." It was the iguana. One time my daddy brought home a monkey. This was before the iguana. And we had the little monkey, and I liked the little monkey. But I think it was my mother decided the monkey needed a bath. So she tried to give the monkey a bath, and I think she wound up getting pneumonia or something or other. I don't know, but the monkey died because it got a bath.
Kevin's coming.
Okay. You don't want me to tell stories on you, do you?
Sure. What's your favorite story about me then?
Oh, no.
I said the favorite thing.
Oh, I don't know. Just that you're my son. I'll let it go at that.
Where were you and Dad married at?
Trinity Evangelical Church, right there on Canal and Murat Street.
I know, remember it well.
Yes, you went to Sunday school there.
Yes, I did.
Uh-huh.
that's about the only two I could come up with there.
That's the only thing you wanted to know.
Did Papa Bill always work as an engineer for railroad?
What they saying?
No. What did Dad work? Who did he work for when y'all got married?
When we got married, he was working with one of the shipping companies. Which company he was with, I don't know. And he was there, and actually when he was down on one of the trips, he actually had boots made for me. He didn't know what size I wore or anything, but I have this lovely pair of riding boots, and he got himself a pair, but he told the man, I think her foot's about this big. And when he brought me the boots back, they fit perfectly. But as I say, he didn't know what size I wore or anything, and this is way down in Montevideo. And while he was down in Montevideo, Bill was a radio operator on the ships, and they call the radio operator Sparky. Well, when he was down there, a radio station offered him a job to be a radio technician for them, and he came back and he mentioned it, and really it would have been interesting to do it, but I can see both my family and his family just about dying because we were both only children, and if we moved all the way down to Montevideo, they wouldn't have liked it. So evidently he had enough sense to turn it down. But after before we got married, he had taken off from the ship, and we got married, and then when he went to try to go back, there wasn't an opening at that time, and Selden, his best friend, was working for Southern Pacific Railroad, and said, well, hey, Bill, come on down, they're hiring down there, because Bill really didn't want to go back to sea since we got married, but that was what he was used to doing. So anyway, he went out and became a railroad man instead of an engineer. First started out as a fireman and then became an engineer.
And that's what he always did?
Following his dad's footsteps.
Yeah. In fact, his father worked with a railroad company, but in the office. And his grandfather worked but he was a railroad yard man, a switchman or something like that, but not on the trains. Now, what's my daughter Margaret want?
Because she asked for me. She asked for a blue-eyed, blonde-haired little girl. She did. Didn't you ask for that when you were pregnant?
See, I had a daughter, then I had a son, and then I had another son, and it was the fourth one. I said, well, gee, I'd like to have a blue-eyed, blonde little girl, because when I was little, I had real blonde hair, and naturally I had the blue eyes. So I wanted a little girl like that. Well, needless to say, I got one.
Yes, you did. What age did all of your children pass you up in height?
What age? What?
We passed you up in height pretty good, tall-wise, right?
Yeah. Oh, I just reached the same height, I guess, when I was in high school, and never did grow another inch.
And by 10 years old, most all of your children were taller than you, right?
Well, I don't know 10, but they were a lot taller than me. Yes. So.
And do you remember about the top of the kitchen cabinets?
The top of the kitchen cabinets.
You couldn't reach it?
Oh, no, I can't reach the tops of the kitchen cabinets at all.
So she would call us constantly.
Yeah. Hey, come here. Instead, I still do that with Kevin. Come get the stuff off the top of the cabinet. I can't reach it. There's that Corningware dish up there I needed because I'm making a big bowl of potato salad. You got to get that one down. But anyway, I never could reach the tops of the cabinets or anything else.
That's why she had 5 tall children.
And why she's always worn heels.
Tell them about the tent when we go camping and your heels.
Oh, well, when we went camping, we started out with a tent. And then, well, naturally, I do not wear shoes unless they have some sort of a heel in it. It must be heels. Nowadays, I can't wear spikes, but I used to wear spikes. But anyway, everybody used to tease me because in ISIS and all, when my 90th birthday, they had a nice big party at Harold's house, and here are my friends again from ISIS there, and they say, let's see her feet. She's still got high heels on her, and I do not go barefooted. I will not go bare. My shoes are here at nighttime. They're off. When I get up in the morning, my shoes go right back on my feet because I don't go barefooted. Now, Margie lived barefooted and broke her toe 1,000,000 times because she went barefooted.
And when we went camping and you could not wear heels, she had to go barefoot in the tent. And it was the funniest thing ever because she walked on her heels and she was waddling.
I waddle like a duck.
She
if I had
did.
to.
She did. She'd put a hole in the tent floor if she wore her spikes. And we'd go camping and she would wear her spikes. I'm telling you.
They weren't spikes. They were flatter heels. They weren't spikes.
No. That's about it for me. And I love you, Mom.
I love you too.
My dad's gonna go and then
Hi, my darling.
I don't care how many books, as long as we're together.
All right. So
Okay.
my question is, tell everybody your favorite flower and tell the story behind the flower with Dad.
Well, my favorite flower was the iris, and I think I've already mentioned how Bill would go off and find it in the woods and bring them home to me.
What about your favorite president?
My favorite president? FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
And why was that?
He got out of the Depression, and I think all government was foolish not to let them go ahead and still have the WPA and the CCC when we went in through other depressions. But I understand people said that's because the unions didn't want it, because with the Depression these men got paid very little, but they at least had money to bring home and put bread on the table. Whereas with the unions, they wanted higher prices for the men, and so that didn't work out very well. But I think FDR did a great job, and even though he said he got us in the war, we needed to get in the war when they treated. See, my dad, I don't know why, but he used to travel to Japan all the time with Likes Brothers, and he would bring me back the dolls and then chests and different things, all hand carved and stuff. But they would evidently get tips or what was going on in Japan, and the government wanted to know. I know he was called to Washington one time. Now, nothing was ever said. It was all, I guess, secrets or something or other. But I do know he was called to Washington. And I imagine it was to get information as to what might have been going on around the docks in Japan, and if they noticed any buildup of ships or anything else. I don't know this for a fact, but it seems to be that is what was taking place.
Okay, well, it's always a good old saying, always save the best for last. Once again, we know your baby's your favorite.
Oh, I've been told that all my life.
I'll deal with it,
That's what they've told me. They always said, oh, that's okay, that's our baby. That's the baby. So, okay.
He tells me that now, just so you know. He teases me about the baby.
Oh,
Okay, for the first part question of his two-part type concept, what was it like with Papa not being there, which Dad to you, and most of your life being he was away? And do you have any memory? I know I've been told the story on how actually he happened to save a town from burning down because it was a big thing, and he was the captain of the ship at the time.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have a picture of a ship, and it was the Coastal Archer, some little town in Mexico. I don't know exactly what little town, or while the ship was close to a little town, but anyway, they were. And this town, naturally, they had a lot of little pasteboard places and different thatched places and stuff, and it started to burn and stuff. And they said the whole town would have gone down if it wasn't for my dad. They pumped the seawater and all into the town and squelched the fires. They had a big write-up of it in this town and in Mexico, and then there was some write-up in the newspaper here too, which we had clippings and which all went in the hurricanes. So, now what was the other question?
What was it like for you, being that he was so much going out of your life, being away?
Well, let's put it this way. It was always a joy to have him come back. And then when he would go to Houston or Galveston, and it was in the summertime, well, I was able to go, and I would stay at my Aunt Olga and Uncle Lynn's house because they lived in Houston, and I would be able to be there and then that is why he was captain of the Archer, but he didn't like to be captain because the captain had to stay on the ship when the ship docked, because they had to fill out extra reports and turn them into the harbor masters and things, whereas if you were the chief mate, which my dad liked to be, when the ship docked, his duties were over and he could get off and come on over to wherever my mother was or I was or something or other. So I got to see him that way. And as I say, I spent some time in Houston, and because Ronnie and Buddy were my other first two cousins, but I wasn't with them very much because they're so much younger than I am. Because actually Ronnie is closer to Cindy's age than she was to me. And another one. Oh, you had wanted to know what my favorite toy was.
Yeah.
My favorite toys, I guess, were dolls. But there was another one when I was small. I guess, I don't know, maybe 7 years or so. It was about this big, by this big. It was a tin, it looked like a tin box. You take the lid off, and it was a wind-up motor. And they had little records. It was a record player. And the records had the nursery rhymes on it. Mary Had a Little Lamb, and different ones of that sort on it. I think there were 6 little records, and I remember that as a child, and that was a very favorite too.
Okay, 2 other quick for me. One, how did you know Daddy was the one?
How did I know? I don't know. I guess I was ready to get married at a time. I had had enough of dating and around. So, and he was kind and gentle, and we were all the same background. He was of the same religion, but he went to the other Salem church, and he was an only child. He lived with his mother and his dad and his grandmother and his grandfather, and even with Auntie until she got married. He was, I guess he must have been around 12 years or so before Auntie got married.
Okay, and the other part is just to put in the record book of history stuff. Family, you had told me once before we have relatives that I think it was the 5 brothers that all went to war at the same time, but the other the one family that had that many got written up in the paper, but we actually had a family that, members like that, we had 5 in the war all at the same time.
Yes, they were some of the Coogan clan. My great-grandmother and grandfather, the grandfather came from Dublin, Ireland, and the grandmother came from Germany. When she came over from Germany, she was 14 years old, and, pardon me, and she came over with a doctor. I think she was more like an indented servant at the time, but somehow or other she connected up with her husband, and they had 8 children, 1 daughter and 7 boys. And in one of those boys was my Uncle Leo, and they had 9 children, Uncle Leo. And of that, 5 of their children were boys, and that were in the service at the same time. And in fact, my cousin who just called me, Edith, gave me a pardon. And yes. Gave me a picture of my grandparents and all their children, and at the same time she sent me a newer clipping, which I have and about those boys again, about those same 4 boys that were in the service together.
I'm going to end it with, thank you for being my mother. I never asked for a greater one.
Well, I'll tell you what, I have to thank God because He has been most generous and kind to me for the family He placed me with, because I couldn't have had better people that cared for me and for the family I have now. As you can see, I've got you all around me and I'm going to keep you. Any other questions?
Hey, Joanne's next really quick.
Thanks, Mom.
Joanne?
I love you, Mama.
I love you too. Okay, come on, my girls.
Okay, who taught you how to drive and how old were you?
I was taught by Bill, my husband, and I guess I must have been about 24.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, you got one?
Hey, ask her the one that you asked me. How old were they when she got engaged?
Oh, how old were you and Grandpa Bill when y'all got engaged?
When he did what?
When y'all got engaged.
When we got engaged, I was 22.
How old was he?
I was he was 20. He was younger than me. I was a cougar. He was married. He was born in January of 1927, and I was born in 25 in May.
And what did Papa Bill do in World War II?
What did he do?
In World War II.
In World War II, he was on the ships. And he actually went to maintenance, and he says they were all covered up with all this heavy clothing because it was so freezing cold. But he said when they reached one of the islands down in the South Pacific, he was on the merchant ships, and they did have a lot better food and stuff than the Navy ships there and something. He invited somebody over to his ship, and he said, you mean you eat like that? And then you mean, because he was an officer and yet he was young, he was only 17 at the time on the ship, and this boy was utterly amazed that he said, you run this whole thing? He says, heck, we've got about 10 men who work ours. So Bill said, all of it is mine to handle and maintain and all. So he was the only radio ship operator on it. And at that time, they were in the areas where they had mines and but the merchantmen at that time, the merchant ships, did not have guns to protect them. In the latter part of the war, some of them were able to be fitted with guns and stuff, but in the beginning they weren't.
Wow. And how long did he serve in the war?
Well, let's see. I guess, I don't know actually, but I guess maybe 2 years.
Okay, so he was done serving when you guys met.
He was what?
Yes. He was done serving when y'all met?
Yes. Yeah, well, the war was over by that time. We were back home. And by that time, he was working with merchant ships, the same thing as it was, but the war was over.
What were we looking at?
I'm going first.
Look at the video.
Y'all ready? 1, 2, 3. Got it.
All right, I'm going next. Cheese. Say cheese.
This person hold it a second.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
I'm going to do one more.
I'm going to do one more too. Let me do one more too. It's ready, huh, Paul? It's ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3.
All right, the video cue real quick. And then can we wave bye? Everybody wave bye.
Okay, everybody wave bye.